Welcome back to lecture number 102, historical topic 9.4, a changing economy. The theme is work exchange technology. There's one learning objective, that is, explain the causes and effects of economic and technological change over time. The first key concept says economic productivity increased as improvements in digital communications enabled and increased American participation in worldwide economic opportunities. This means that the economy got better because economic productivity increased as a result of greater communication. The companies that drove this growth were technology companies in the United States, and most of these companies were and still are located in Silicon Valley, California. Apple, Intel, and Yahoo are examples of these, while Microsoft started in Seattle and AOL was in the East Coast. These companies are all part of what's called the dot-com boom. These technology companies helped increase internet access. Even as rudimentary and slow by our standards as it was in the 1990s, the rise of the internet more easily connects producers and consumers, which helps economic activity. Even at the time, people were aware that it was going to bring about monumental change. For that reason, a period of over-speculation in internet-based companies, especially those with .com in their names, came about. This was the dot-com boom. Investors didn't care much about the profitability of the companies they invested in, they just thought that the growth was guaranteed since they were buying at the ground floor. In the early 2000s, many of these companies failed to meet the early expectations and the bubble burst. The 90s overall were a good economic growth period for the United States. GDP grew steadily at 4% and unemployment went all the way down to 3.9%. That is what economists call full employment because there's always going to be a small percentage of workers in between jobs. The phrase increased participation in economic opportunities is straight from the key concept. One of these economic opportunities was the use of e-commerce or online shopping created by the internet. Membership in free trade agreements like NAFTA and the WTO were covered in a previous lecture, but also fit the description of the key concept. Due to decreasing restrictions, trade between countries in the agreement goes up. The next key concept says, technological innovations in computing, digital mobile technology, and the internet transformed daily life, increased access to information, and led to new social behaviors and networks. The transformation in daily life can be seen with the reliance on the internet and technology. Many of the systems that the US uses today are heavily dependent on internet access and other technology. The Global Positioning System, or GPS navigation, was developed by the Department of Defense as part of the Cold War and space race. In the 1980s, it began allowing civilian use of the technology and is most commonly used with apps to create driving routes or locate people or objects. Credit cards were around in the last historical period. The first one was developed by Diners Club in 1950 in the midst of a decade of consumerism. Though now, the purchasing power of credit cards has gone up since a transaction can be cleared with a bank almost instantly through digital communication. The greater ease of using a credit card actually leads consumers to buy more products and thereby helps economic growth. The second effect listed by the key concept is increased access to information. This is partly because technology increases the rate of new discoveries and innovations. For example, the Human Genome Project was launched in 1990 with the goal of mapping the approximate 3 billion base pairs in a goal time of 15 years. Because of the increasing rate of technology improving, the project was officially completed 2 years ahead of schedule. MRI machines, which were first built in 1970, grow much more common in use in this historical period. Doctors are able to see cross-sections of their patients' bodies to make better diagnoses. Finally, the rate of vaccine development is something that has been quite relevant in the last 5 years. The coronavirus outbreak forced countries to focus their efforts into developing a vaccine that could not have been done without the technology and breakthroughs of the last 50 years. Even the mapping of the evolution of the virus and the alterations of vaccines to fight each variant of the virus shows the great importance in the technology developments of the recent past. In addition to speeding up discoveries, it also removes previous barriers to learning. It stores nearly all of the world's knowledge in one accessible place. One is not hampered by the size of their local library or the learning resources that they have nearby. Instead, one's only barrier is one's internet connection. These lectures are a great example of this because presumably you're watching this lecture on a web platform that would be inaccessible without the internet. The new social behaviors relate mostly to the increased use of social media apps. The first iPhone launched in the summer of 2007, and it slowly started to add utility and entertainment applications for its users to download and use. Social media apps with a previous web presence started developing their apps very shortly after. Facebook launched theirs in 2008, Twitter in 2009, and Instagram, which started exclusively a social media app in 2010. There is a benefit in that these social media networks have the opportunity to connect people to their real-life friends and introduce them to new friends in far-off places. However, the increased use of these apps have shown negative psychological effect on kids and teens. Since 2010, teens in the United States and the UK have shown increased symptoms of depression. The effect is even more stark on teen girls. Through Facebook's own internal study on the users and impact of their apps, showing that the social comparison of idealized body types and lifestyles on these apps exacerbate a teen's negative body image. There is an additional danger in using these social media platforms that is giving away too much personal information. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram all get personal and demographic information on their users, their age, their sex, gender, profession, interest, and browsing history. They then can use this information to target users with ads. Corporations pay social media platforms millions of dollars to put their ads in front of the eyes of the right user. Additionally, the social media companies can provide corporations enough data to track your browsing all the way to a physical store where one makes a purchase. These are really good technological innovations to generate economic activity, not so good for your personal information. Finally, social media can be used to influence voters in the way they vote in an election. In the 2016 election, the consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, which was hired by the Trump campaign, harvested personal data from millions of Facebook users. The firm then created profiles of millions of voters in the US and other countries to be used in a similar way that advertisers use personal information. In that same election, a misinformation campaign led by the Russian intelligence agency, the GRU, targeted American voters in social media groups and incensed them by spreading misinformation. The second to last key concept says employment increased in service sectors and decreased in manufacturing, and union membership also declined. These patterns are continuities from before the 1980s, and they continue to the present day. There is an increase in service sector jobs, which usually have lower pay and no benefits like health insurance or retirement. So even though people may be employed at the unemployment rates may suggest that the economy is healthy, the precarious position of the many workers in the service industry may suggest otherwise. Therefore, in the 21st century, economists may put as much emphasis on the underemployment rate as they do on the unemployment rate. That is, the percentage of people that need to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. The decrease in manufacturing comes about because of cheaper labor in other countries and the reduction in trade barriers. So if a company can outsource their labor to a country where workers are paid less and they don't have to pay tariffs whenever they import those goods back into the United States, then that creates more profit for that company. It's a common path of action that American companies took, so it leads to loss of manufacturing jobs in the US. With the loss of manufacturing jobs, union membership also declined. This is because union jobs are generally more prominent in the manufacturing industry. The rate of union membership goes to as low as 12% by the late 90s, down from 30% in the 1960s. Additionally, states begin to pass what are called right-to-work laws, which make it illegal for unions to have what's called a closed shop. A closed shop industry is one in which a worker must join the union in order to be offered a job in that industry. Traditionally, strong unions have been in manufacturing like the United Auto Workers, but there's also unions in other professions like law enforcement, firefighting, and teachers' unions. In the year 2019 and early 2020, there were teachers all across the Southwest that went on strike to negotiate for a living wage. Their campaign was called the Red for Ed campaign, and it brought attention to the dismal pay that teachers get in states like Arizona. Adjusted for wages and cost of living differences, average teacher salary is worse in Arizona, Florida, and Mississippi. The average adjusted figure in those states is below $50,000 a year. The last key concept says real wages stagnated for the working and middle class amid growing economic inequality. So despite this huge period of economic growth that started in the 1990s, the growth was not shared equally by all. By 1999, the top 20% of households received 50% of all income, and there was an even greater disparity for racial minorities. By 2010, the top 1% had 43% of the wealth, and as shown in the graph in the bottom right, the top 10% here held about 75% of the nation's wealth at the height of the disparity in 2007. A lot of this has to do with the new economy and the changes previously mentioned. Those high-paying manufacturing jobs went away, and those who were laid off had to take on lower-paying service sector jobs. The changes are also related to the reduction in tax burdens that came about as a result of the conservative movement. The wealthiest Americans were able to hold on to a greater percentage of their income, therefore making the wealth gap greater. After the Great Recession in 2008, this inequality is more visible. The general population was angry that they were suffering economically, while the bankers who made the risky investments that started the recession were bailed out by the federal government and kept their high-paying jobs. The growing movement started after a sit-in style protest called Occupy Wall Street. This was adopted by the rest of the country and broadly called the Occupy movement. They called for greater government action on economic inequality, and they referred to themselves as the 99%, because the 1% of the population had so much more of the nation's wealth. Finally, here's the recap. Growth in technology led to economic growth and changed daily life for Americans. There was growth in the lower-paying service sector jobs and a decline of higher-paying manufacturing, usually union jobs. Finally, economic inequality rose through this latter half of the 20th century. A smaller percentage of the population held a greater share of the nation's wealth. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click the video link on the screen. And if you're looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit apushslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying and look forward to seeing you back on the next lecture.